Journey Together is just around the corner. Pre-releases have already happened, and congratulations to everybody that's gotten to go out and get those cards and play in those tournaments. I haven't had a chance to do that, but congrats to all of you that have. And one of the big new decks coming out of that set is Ends Zoroark EX. So today we're going to take a couple of minutes to look over at Post-Rotation Japan, where they've had this card for a couple months now, and see how they're building the deck. I'm Jet from InThirdPerson.com. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's continue our post-rotation previews with Ends Zoroark EX. Ends Zoroark EX is a dark Pokemon with 280 HP. It's got 2 retreat, and it has the ability Trade, which is going to sound familiar to a number of current players in the Pokemon trading card game, where you must discard a card from your hand in order to use this ability, and once during your turn, you may draw 2 cards. For those that are currently playing the game, yes, this is the Kirlia Refinement ability, which is the Ends Zoroark EX. Well, it's the Zoroark EX trade ability from the Sun and Moon days, which made it one of the most beloved and competitively viable cards of its time, and it's cool to see its ability come back. Its attack is different from Zoroark EX though. Instead, it has Night Joker for 2 dark energy, where choose one of your benched Ends Pokemon's attacks and use it as this attack. And this attack also sounds kind of familiar because it's essentially Mew VMAX's attack, where it could copy the attacks of Fusion Strike Pokemon on the bench. But this time we've got a little bit of a draw engine built into Zoroark with that trade ability and the Mew VMAX attack, making the potential of this card incredibly high. Some of the attacks it can copy are off of Ends Reshiram, where it's got 2 attacks. The first one, Powerful Rage, for a fire and a lightning, and that's not really going to matter here. We're not using fire and lightning energy to power the Reshiram up, so we're copying it with Zoroark. The first attack, Powerful Rage, does 20 damage for each damage counter on this Pokemon. The Ends Zoroark technically has the power to one-hit KO almost anything in the game if it takes enough damage in the first place, but you're not always going to be able to tank hits, and you kind of have to eat a hit in the first place in order to get that big KO. So it's a situational attack, but a nice one to have. And then its second attack, Virtuous Flame, for 2 fire, a lightning, and a colorless, is 170 damage. This would be horrible trying to manually power this up, but with Zoroark EX, 2 dark energy, not too bad. 170 is not where you want it to be. It is unfortunately a little short. You are going to knock out stuff like Squawkabilly EX, so small support multi-prize Pokemon this is good for, but it's going to fall short in a number of other situations. Another couple of attacks we can copy come from Ends Darmanitan, and it's got the attack Backdraft for 2 colorless energy. Again, we're copying it with Zoroark, so don't worry about the costs here. This attack does 30 damage for each energy card in your opponent's discard pile. For the most part, this isn't gonna matter unless you're fighting something like Ceruledge, which is relying on getting a ton of energy in the discard pile, so I wouldn't put too much stake in this one. But its second attack, Blaseball Cannon, is very strong for 2 fire and a colorless. Again, don't worry about the cost here. Does 90 damage to the active, and then you discard all energy from this Pokemon and do 90 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So Zoroark, also a bench sniper as well, though you will have to get rid of that 2 dark energy when you use it, but being able to either take out 2 smaller targets or soften up bigger targets with that snipe attack is very nice. Our primary form of energy acceleration is Ends PP Up. This is an item card that works similar to Dark Patch that is on the way out, where you can attach a basic energy from your discard pile to one of your benched Ends Pokemon. And yeah, primarily it's going to be dark energy because we are powering up Zoroark more often than not. But if you really wanted to power up the Darmanitan or anything else under the End lineup, you can use Ends PP Up for some quick energy acceleration as well. Ends Castle fixes one of the big issues with Zoroark EX, where each of Ends Pokemon has no retreat cost, allowing us to pivot our Pokemon in and out of the active as needed. In particular, because of Ends PP Up can only charge up Pokemon on the bench, there will be times where you'll want to play Ends PP Up to power up a bench Pokemon and then pivot that into the active to attack, and Ends Castle allows us to make those plays a lot easier to pull off. Here's a look at the metagame in Japan. And just as a heads up, this is the final Journey Together, their equivalent of Journey Together's metagame, because they just got the Heatwave Arena cards. So going forward, we're not going to be able to use Japan as a direct reference for hot and new information. We will get the last of their Journey Together stuff to cover our upcoming Journey Together format. And where things have ended off is that Dragapult has cemented itself as the best deck in the format. Clefairy has slipped a little bit down to A tier, but that was S tier the week before. And then the Zoroark deck has been kind of hanging out in B tier for a little while now. It's not irrelevant, but it's certainly not the powerhouse that maybe some were hoping for. It still gets played, it still gets wins. It has 241 top 16 appearances in Japanese City League tournaments, but it's certainly not as popular or meta relevant as some of the most popular decks in the format. So for example, a Dragapult EX and a Clefairy EX, those have seen over 1,000 top 16 finishes in the same amount of time that Zoroark has gotten 241. Again, 241 is not the worst in the world. There are some meta relevant decks right now that completely fall off a cliff, like less than 30 appearances in top 16, like a Miraidon or a Roaring Moon. Those are decks that are basically irrelevant now post-rotation. And Zoroark doing 241, it's okay. It can win a tournament. It can do very well in big tournaments. For example, the Champions League tournament that happened in Japan a couple of weeks ago, Zoroark got into top 16. And that's a big accomplishment, especially since this tournament had 5,000 players in it. And Zoroark was able to sneak into top cut here. So that is a awesome accomplishment for this deck, and does show that this deck does have potential, even if it's not necessarily the obvious powerhouse deck of the format. While we're on the subject of Champions League, let's look at the one that got top 16 at that event. We've got a thick 4/4 line of Zoroark as our draw engine as well as our primary attacker. We've got a 3/2 line of the Darmanitan as our sniper here. One copy of the En's Reshiram to copy its attack. And then let's start digging a little deeper into some of the deck specific text, including Badoo. This is a staple of many decks in the current format. Its Itchy Pollen attack only does 10 damage, but for 0 energy, it item locks your opponent on their next turn, giving us more time to set up. Pecharunt EX is a great Pokemon in this deck for a multitude of reasons. Its Subjugating Chains ability gives your dark Pokemon the ability to pivot in and out of the active, and while it does mean that you have to poison your active Pokemon, the new active Pokemon coming in, that actually does give you some extra synergy as well, because we have Binding Mochi in the deck where your poison Pokemon do an additional 40 damage. So being able to bump some of those attacks, in particular the Reshiram attack that does 170, being able to bump that up to 210 at least puts you in range of knocking out something like a Pheasantipity EX or a Teal Mask Ogerpon in one hit. But that extra 40 damage can mean a lot, and it's going to boost your snipe attack as well, at least the attack to the active. So Binding Mochi plus the Pecharunt, really nice combo for additional damage. In a jam, you could even attack with Pecharunt EX. Irritated Outburst for 2 dark energy does 60 damage for each prize card your opponent has taken. So if they've taken 5 prizes, you're swinging for 300 damage here, which is nothing to sneeze at. The A-spec of choice is Unfair Stamp. If one of your Pokemon was knocked out on the previous turn, both players will shuffle their hand into their deck. You will draw 5 cards, they will draw 2. And hopefully that hand disruption will give you enough time to set up your bench and set up your Pokemon and make a nice comeback. Tactical Machine Evolution makes its appearance here as a single copy, where you get to evolve 2 of your bench Pokemon up to the next stage for 1 energy and use that as your attack for turn. So in turns where you're not item locking with Badoo, you can evolve up and get your Zoroark and your Darmanitan in play. Defiance Band is another way that this deck tries to compensate for its awkward damage breaks, where if you're behind on prizes, you will do an extra 30 damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. One additional tech here is Pokemon League Headquarters, where attacks used by basic Pokemon in play, both yours and your opponent's, cost a colorless more. This doesn't really affect you because you are not using a basic Pokemon to attack. I guess Badoo is going to be. So actually keep that in mind, that Pokemon League Headquarters will make Badoo's attack cost 1 instead of 0. But this is primarily here as a way of countering the super hot Clefairy deck, the Terra box. I'm not sure exactly what that's called, but that deck with Clefairy and the Teal Mask Ogerpon and all of those other tech Pokemon, it's relying entirely on basic Pokemon to attack, and Pokemon League headquarters is here to slow them down. One additional tech here that every list is going to have, and that is Reversal Energy. In short, this allows your Darmanitan to attack with only 1 energy attachment, giving you the opportunity to use that bench sniping attack in one go. So really nice way of getting a single prize attacker in the mix while also having a bench sniper that only drops 1 prize. This second list is very similar to the first, and you'll find that most of the Zoroark lists are pretty refined in the sense that they're all very similar with some minor adjustments. And one of the minor adjustments here is the addition of Monkey Dory, where if you've got damage, you can move 3 damage counters from one of your Pokemon to one of your opponent's Pokemon. Will help you fix the damage deficit that you have with your attacks being a little wonky here and there. Can also be a Badoo counter of sorts where you can move damage directly onto Badoo and knock it out. Janine's Secret Art is an additional form of energy acceleration where you can accelerate energy to 2 of your dark Pokemon, and then if one's in the active, you can poison it. Again, poison's not the end of the world because you've got Binding Mochi in the deck as well, giving you an extra 40 damage on poison Pokemon. This third list, again, very similar to the ones we've looked at so far, but with a couple of minor adjustments. One is the inclusion of Blood Moon Ursaluna, where its season skilled ability allows it to attack for 1 less energy for each prize card your opponent's taken. So towards the end of the game, you're swinging for a solid 240 damage while having to attach 0 energy, perhaps, maybe just 1. This is a really nice endgame attacker when you just need something to finish off something in the active that has a lot of HP left. Cypher Maniac's Code Breaking is a cool tech here, which lets you search your deck for 2 cards and put them at the top of your deck. Then you would combo that with Zoroark's trade ability to grab those 2 cards off of the top. Maximum Belt is the way that this player chose to go with their A-Spec while also fixing some of the weird damage breakpoints, where now you're swinging for an additional 50 damage onto EX Pokemon. And if you're copying the 170 attack, you are now doing 220, which is a much better breakpoint, taking out a number of big basic Pokemon. And you're also doing more damage on the Darmanitan attack, at least the part that hits the active. So really nice way of upping the damage and trying to work around some of your wonky breakpoints. Power Glass is a very cool tech here, where at the end of your turn, if the Pokemon this card is attached to is in the active spot, you can attach a basic energy card from your discard pile to it. And the big combo here is with Zoroark copying Darmanitan's attack, where the attack forces you to discard all of your energy, but if you've got Power Glass on your Zoroark, you're going to get one of those energies back, and then you just have to attach a second one from hand on the following turn to snipe again. This fourth ends list squeezes in a Pokemon we haven't seen just yet, and that is Joltik. This one, for 2 colorless energy, does 30 damage, and before doing any damage, all Pokemon tool cards from your opponent's active Pokemon are discarded. And then if you discard any tools this way, your opponent's active Pokemon is now paralyzed. Interesting tech. I'm not sure that most of the Zoroark decks don't run this card, but there are some use cases for it. There might be some important tools that you want to knock off of your opponent's Pokemon or potentially get that paralysis in. This could also just be a way of countering Badoo, because that 30 damage will just knock it out. Hyperoma is the A-Spec of choice in this deck, letting you search your deck for 3 stage 1 Pokemon, revealing them and putting them to your hand. Totally makes sense in the context of this deck, allowing you to grab copies of your Zoroark EX as well as your Darmanitan. This is the last of the vanilla and Zoroark lists that we're going to be looking at, and this one techs in an Okidogi EX as a big attacker. It's got the attack Chain Crazed, where for 2 dark and a colorless, it does 130 damage, and if this Pokemon is poisoned, this attack does 130 more damage. And we're going to achieve that with Janine's Secret Art and Energy Switch and ends PP up, moving the energy over to Okidogi, getting it poisoned, and then with Binding Mochi on top, we're now swinging for 300 damage with the Okidogi EX. And then on top of that, we have Gravity Mountain, where each stage 2 Pokemon in play, both yours and your opponent's, get 30 less HP, at which point an Okidogi EX is going to have enough firepower to one-hit KO a Charizard EX or a Dragapult EX. Yes, it's a lot to combo that, but even if you don't hit that, you are still swinging for very strong damage with the Okidogi EX, potentially 260, potentially 300, and that's going to be better than what the Zoroark can do by itself more often than not. Now let's look at a couple Zoroark decks that aren't really Zoroark decks. They use Zoroark, but they have other attackers here, and this one is Ceruledge EX. And Ceruledge's whole deal is that we throw a bunch of energy in the discard pile, and then we use a Blissful Flame for 30 damage plus 20 more damage for each energy card in our discard pile, giving us a heavy hitter that the deck otherwise doesn't really have. And we can still attack with Zoroark here. We still have End's PP up, and we have the Reshiram, so we can use that as an early game attacker as well if we want to, but Ceruledge EX does give us a little more of a reliable heavy hitter attacker. Fan Rotom is not here to get our colorless Pokemon established. Instead, it is here for that assault landing attack where for a colorless energy, you do 70 damage, and if there's no stadium in play, this attack does nothing. It can be a great way of poking our opponent turn one going second because this deck doesn't really have a way of hitting that early in the game. And on top of that, it does give us an opportunity to knock out stuff like a Mimikyu, for example, where this deck otherwise can't hit through a Mimikyu, and Fan Rotom is great for punching through those. Luminous Energy is here as our rainbow energy of choice. Just make sure that you aren't playing this in tandem with Jet Energy on the same Pokemon, because otherwise the Luminous Energy just turns into colorless energy. But having Luminous Energy here is handy because you can use that to either power up Ceruledge or Zoroark. Jet Energy is here to launch the appropriate attacker into the active spot. In particular, turn one going second, this can be a great way of launching Fan Rotom into the active to take that cheeky first attack. Of course, there's a variation of Zoroark that runs the Dusknoir line, because why wouldn't you just put the Dusknoir in everything? And this one's actually a little different of a deck because we are focusing very heavily on sniping here. With Dusknoir, we can blow ourselves up and drop 13 damage counters on one of our opponent's Pokemon. Dusclops does the same thing, but we drop 5 instead of 13. So great way of spreading damage on the board. And of course, we're comboing that with the Darmanitan spread attack so that we are getting even more damage wherever we want on the board. We don't actually have the Reshiram here, so Zoroark can only copy the Darmanitan attack, so lots of focus on bench sniping in this deck. As an alternate attacker, Luxray is here, and we don't have the full evolution line here. We don't need it. We're taking advantage of the Swelling Flash ability, where once during our turn, if our opponent has fewer prize cards than us, we can just bench Luxray without having to evolve all the way up to it. And then its Wild Charge attack for a lightning and 2 colorless does 180 damage, and it does 20 damage to itself. And we're going to be using Reversal Energy to power this up in one go. Call Bell is a very specific tech for this deck, but I really like its inclusion here. You can only use it turn one going second, but it allows you to search your deck for a supporter card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, then shuffle your deck. In particular, that's going to be important for grabbing Arven, which is then going to grab you Precious Trolley as our ace-spec of choice, which allows us to fully set up our bench right away. Some Gardevoir players are missing Kirlia so bad that they're willing to drop Zoroark EX in there as their Kirlia replacement. And technically, yes, it's going to discard a card and draw 2 cards, but there are a number of downsides of playing Zoroark in your Gardevoir deck. This is taking up more bench space because you can't rely on a Kirlia just turning into a Gardevoir later. This drops 2 prizes. It has you can't attack at all with the Zoroark here because we don't have anything to copy. It has 2 retreat, so it is prone to getting stuck. There are a number of downsides to running Zoroark in a Gardevoir deck, and that's why not that many people have been playing Zoroark in Gardevoir, but it is something you can do, something that players are doing in Japan, and some players are getting results with it as well. The last one we're going to look at here is a top 16 list featuring Roaring Moon EX. And Roaring Moon, I wanted to focus on this one in particular because Roaring Moon is one of the decks that's absolutely struggling in post-rotation Japan. And this is one of the few instances where it actually made top 16. And this is primarily a Roaring Moon deck that has Zoroark as a draw engine. We don't have any way of copying attacks, so we're not attacking with the Zoroark. We do have a way of retreating it if it gets stuck with the End's Castle, but really, this is a Roaring Moon deck. As a quick refresher, its big attack is Frenzied Gouging, where it can instantly KO your opponent's active Pokemon, but you do 200 damage to yourself, and Calamity Storm does 100 damage, but if you've got a Stadium in play, you can do 120 more damage, helping you take out a number of big basics, though you are a little short of some of the most meta-relevant ones, including Roaring Moon, Iron Hands, and Raging Bolt. We also have Baby Roaring Moon here. We're only using Vengeance Fletching as its attack for 2 dark energy, does 70 damage and 10 more damage for each ancient card in your discard pile. However, this isn't a dedicated ancient box deck, so we don't actually have that many ancient cards in here, so it's not going to be a one-hit KO on most multi-prize Pokemon more often than not. We are using this as an attacker for the early game, potentially taking out smaller evolution Pokemon like a Charizard or a Charmander or a Ralt or something like that, but giving us a way of skewing the prize race a little bit while also not putting our 2 prizers in the line of fire right away. This is a bit more of a box deck, so we do have Lily's Clefairy EX, which we can power up pretty easily for only a Psychic and a Colorless, do 20 damage and 20 more damage for each bench Pokemon, both yours and your opponent's. And this hits Dragon Pokemon for weakness, giving us more opportunities to one-hit KO those super popular Pokemon like Raging Bolt and Dragapult EX with ease. We're used to seeing Roaring Moon as a very up-tempo, fast deck, and it's very odd to see Mimikyu in here, but this is a slower deck than we're used to seeing for Roaring Moon. So we do have Mimikyu here as a way to potentially stall for time. It is invulnerable to attacks from Pokemon EX and Pokemon V, giving us more time to set up. Without Dark Patch in the game, accelerating energy becomes a little more awkward. We still have Sada's Vitality, which is great, but we're also adding in Janine's Secret Art here as well, allowing us to accelerate a energy to 2 of our dark Pokemon and potentially poison the active Pokemon if we are accelerating energy that way to your active. And it's not ideal, but it is a way of doing this. We also have Crispin in here as a way of getting more than 1 energy on the board at a time, and we also have Energy Switch here as well. Oftentimes, if you're playing the Sada's Vitality or the Janine's Secret Art, you are going to be moving one of those energies onto the Pokemon that you plan on attacking with so that you have the tempo to attack in 1 or 2 turns. Prime Catcher is the ace spec of choice for Roaring Moon decks. This is no exception. You get to gust your opponent's bench Pokemon into the active and then gust one of your bench Pokemon into the active. So having basically a item-based boss's orders is always good. Last but not least, we have Cycling Road here, which is our dollar store variant of Radiant Greninja, where once during your turn, you can discard a basic energy and draw a card. Not ideal, but it does give you a little extra draw power. There we go. That is a look at En's Zoroark EX. And again, I wish it was doing better in Japan. It has proven that it can win tournaments and do very well on the biggest stage, but it feels like its attacks that it's copying are just not quite it. And we're seeing players run things like Binding Mochi and Defiance Band to try and fix some of the math, and it's going to work sometimes here and there, but it doesn't feel like it's consistent enough to make this one of the top decks. Maybe we'll see other attackers get thrown in the mix to make this a little more reliable. Maybe we'll see some other support cards that make this deck stronger than it is right now. But as it currently stands, it seems like a deck that is on the fringes of the meta, can spike a tournament here and there, but maybe not the juggernaut that some would have hoped. But is that going to stop you from playing this archetype? Let me know in the comments below. But for now, I got to get going. Thank you so much for watching. You can find me on all the things: YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram at InThirdPerson. You can find me on Twitch at InThirdPerson, where I stream the Pokemon trading card game every Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And check out the website, InThirdPerson.com, for more articles and videos on video games, board games, and other nerdy pursuits. If you're watching me on Twitch, stick around. But if you're watching me on YouTube, thank you so much for watching. We're out of here. Bye-bye.